Okay. I have started recording. Go whenever.
Okay. I never stopped, so I think Craig is still going on my end.
Yeah.
Figured I'd just split it later. Let me make sure. Yep. Okay. All right. Here we go. Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm Will, owner of Gamenomicon, and you're listening to the latest episode of Will and Jerod Make a Game. This should be episode 7, if we're counting correctly. And my co-host and co-creator is here with me.
Hey, I'm Jerod. I am the other part of this endeavor. I am just happy to be here for this one. What I love about what we're doing on this podcast is we kind of take turns on not only the introductions, but also Will has a question, and I'm excited.
Yeah, I purposely didn't say much about this one to Jared because I thought it would give it away. And then I went back to the document today, um, right before I left work. I didn't have much going on, so I went to scroll back through to double check a couple things before I asked the question. And now I have a different question for Jared to start off with, and then I'll explain. Jared, have you updated the conflict resolution text in the last few days?
Yes, I have. I've been working very diligently on it.
Okay, that probably explains that. So here's the question I was going to bring up. I've phrased this to Jared as a Ship of Theseus question, right? And for anybody that has, at a minimum, watched WandaVision, or in general is familiar with the kind of philosophical concept that has to do with the historical Ship of Theseus, and as it's damaged and sections of the wood need to be replaced, even if you're keeping something, say, in the museum or whatever. Over the centuries, there's no longer any of the original part left. Is it still the Ship of Theseus? And of course, in WandaVision, we've got that question about vision and that sort of thing. So I think folks in general can see how you might apply that to games, particularly when you are working from some system resource document. You're working with an existing system. I think most folks, when they set down to play a game or when they set out to create one like this, right, they don't expect all of them to be exactly the same. Then that gets kind of boring. Why not only put out the one rule book and some settings, splat books or something, right? But there is theoretically some core that, like, there is a level that is, in my mind, hard to describe, that once you've changed X number of things, is it still easiest ship anymore? Once you've crossed that 50% threshold, is it a new thing? Or what? So here now is the question I was going to pose Jared, and before I let him answer, I'm going to mention what I looked at today. Okay. So the question for Jared was going to be, coming up with that percentage or whatever is very difficult, but it might be more easy to take a look at the tension engine and say, hey, what is the core that you feel makes it that system that would need to not change? To some extent, to me, I think of that as tension itself, which plays a few roles in Party First. And I know we were already talking about tweaking some of those roles in this game, and with good reasons. But I swear to you, when I read the document last week, there were no longer any ways to generate tension. Because I know one of the things that Jerod, his games have gone very differently, and tension has really gone through the roof. And I know that that was something he wanted to dial back here. Uh, but I swear to you, there was literally nothing. And that was why I was like, wait a minute. I want to ask this Ship of Theseus that question, kind of, when does it cease to be the tension engine? And then ask Jerod, like, and I don't mean this negatively, but like, does it maybe, should it just have the freedom to be its own system if you no longer have tension play any role? And then I sit down and look back at it today, and there are ways to generate tension, and that's what I think he tweaked some wording on in the conflict resolution. I swear, tension was not mentioned there last week when I looked.
Okay. Very astute in there's two things that happened here. There are two things. One, when I originally threw out, or not threw out, when I wrote up in my head how I thought mechanically the game would go, there is, I just tried to put it all in my own wording. So I started there, right? So I wanted to try and make it as streamlined. There's this thing that has just been stuck in my head ever since college, and just a professor said this just once, and it just hit me in the right spot. And the idea is, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it, right? And a part of that is to uh, take a project like this and to be able to say it in my own words in as simple language as possible. Now, in doing so, I think I created way more chaos and confusion than what I ever
Uh-oh.
wanted to try and do for creating the mechanics here. Uh, give me one moment. Hey, buddy, come here. Honey, are you okay? You want water? Okay. Hi. This is this is Murphy, and she needs to get some water. So we're gonna help her out here, okay?
Sure thing.
All right, be right back. What's wrong?
Also, hi Murphy.
Yeah, you want to say hi? This is Will. This is the guy I'm making the game with. Okay. Take my glasses off. All right.
No problem.
All right. Yep. We're good. Cat's fed. Water's gotten. We're all good.
It's good.
And I know exactly where I left off on there. So in trying to rewrite all that, causing confusion, causing some of the stuff just wasn't even written right. Because I know a couple of your questions on there, I was just like, yeah, oh, that's me. I used the wrong word there. So here's here's what helped me rewrite it in a way that made more sense. Um, I mean, I just took the SRD, right? Just took the SRD and just started there. And then I just edited the stuff to what kind of changes I wanted to see with like just stuff kind of crossed off. And I've got those saved in a different document called scraps, which I can be more than happy to share with you just so you can see my process on there. Now, on one of those is that the group. Uh, so the thing that I realized is that in Party First, which is the thing I've been playing for like the last 2 years, is the party check or the check where you use the lowest skill as that is the default check that you make in that game, right? You get a party point and you start off bad. And when you roll ones, it makes it worse and keeps the tension going, right? So when I was putting together what the default roll was going to be for Unity, I started off on the group check. That's not the right direction. I needed to start with the individual check. So
Mm-hmm.
once I looked at that, I'm like, okay, you use whatever the default check is. That's how you generate your tension in your uh, morale points. And then your group check, that's what can help you get your party points. And after I figured out that I just needed to reverse those two in my mind, so the individual check is the one that generates that set it all off, helped me organize it and to write it just much better. Because what I was presenting to you, I think, was the group check, and yeah, there wasn't any way to get tension points.
I think when I looked at it, the personal one sticks out more to me. But I think you had it as generating a morale for ones and an adventure point for sixes or something. And like between that and already making some tweaks, I know you wanted to shift to more kind of GM determined difficulty checks for the environment rather than tied into tension. That's when I got to reading and like rereading. I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure this was conscious on Jerod's part, but I'm like, maybe he doesn't realize he just wants to jettison tension entirely at this point.
No, no, not at all, because it's the roles that the players make. They're the ones that are going to generate the tension. The environment part, if you just put it as a difficulty number, like that just means that the GM's going to use less tension points. And honestly, for the most part, during environmental checks, I really don't spend that much tension points to try and beat the players because most of the time
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to be the player's advocate, right? And especially if they're trying to find like if this is a way to get a secret or whatever, it'll help move the plot along. Like, yeah, I don't want to stonewall them. I want them to struggle a little bit, but I don't want to stonewall them. And so I think by changing that just to a difficult number, I think that'll take care of two problems. I'm hoping right there. It'll make it just quicker, rolling less dice. Now, that being said, part of the Ship of Theseus um, conversation is this. What
Yeah.
do you consider is the core of the tension system? I think there's two things,
That's
and I'll let you answer first, and then I've got my two things.
that's a good question. And I think particularly a tricky one in some ways in in something that was written for a particular niche, and I think written to kind of integrate with that and reinforce those themes, and now trying to walk that backward into the more general SRD,
Yeah.
and then walk it forward, off to the other side now. Um, in trying to kind of mentally distance myself properly to like analytically look at that, like, some stuff I had a gut reaction earlier when I was thinking about it to be like, oh well, like a D6 pool or roll and keep type of stuff, and I'm like, well, I don't know. I could see a game that for whatever reason wanted to make it D10s or something instead. So maybe not even that. Um, I think maybe the roll and keep is fairly important to keeping it in that family, and I think I'm going to cheat here by using the name Tension Engine, but the Tension Engine in a more generic sense than the name, I think is probably key to me, as far as right looking at it as a flow of currencies in and out, like you mentioned a moment ago, in base party first, spending tension points to pump the environment by tension forces players, if they really want to succeed, to blow party points to keep more dice to hit that and that sort of thing. And so that flow between the GM's currency and the player's currency, and that it doesn't necessarily have to interact exactly the same way, but to me that factor, the way they pump back and forth, is the engine to me.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's yeah, the flow just feels really good. It feels really good in the tension. To me, the way that I feel how the tension engine works, I think there's two important things, and one of them I am sidestepping by setting the difficulty numbers. There is a really good, and it shows up in Party First excellently. There's a very good feeling of early on in the adventure, picking a lock is pretty easy, right? But later on in the adventure or in the horror movie, it gets a lot more difficult because you're more rattled and all this stuff. The tension's got a lot higher. So I think that's a pretty important thing to the system is that and those are in this game the environmental checks. And we talked about it in a previous episode. I think that is a hallmark of the tension system, I think. And I am kind of sidestepping that part by doing the difficulty numbers.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you split that with the difficulty, like, I don't know. I'm spitballing theories here. I'm not meaning to like naysay or anything, but yeah, I'm how even if that is a fairly key factor to you, sidestepping it. I guess maybe a question might be: are there other pieces that are also really key to you? Just for example's sake, let's say there were three that were really important to you, and you said, well, hey, we're going to sidestep one of those three, but I think it's really important to keep the other two. It makes sense to me that, like, you're still you're still Theseus's ship at that point, right?
Yeah, I
So
think
what
so.
other pieces do you think?
Yeah, so the final piece, which I think to me is the defining mechanic in Wound by Tension, is the tension table itself and the table triggering. So I think this goes back to the part one where you have that ebb and flow of adventure points and tension points between the GM and the players back and forth to eventually hit that critical mass of the tension table. And Unity is going to take the idea of the tension table and we're going to expand on it.
I really like where that's going. I mean, that's worth a whole episode talking about that, but I really
Yep.
like it.
And I think the tension table is amazing. And I think you can do a lot of different things. I think you can set up the whole theme of the adventure just on the tension table and not have to do much else. You can put in adventure hooks, you can put in run ins, you can do whatever you want to do. And one of the things that we talked about that we're also excited about doing is that we're going to have a localized tension table to to the players right then. Then we're also going to have an overarching tension table that will push um, story arcs. There's going to be at minimum, I'm hoping anyway, a minimum 2 other story arcs happening during the game that the players may or may not know about. They may hear like a mention of stuff in the background, and this is all stuff just to push to make the world more real. It's also going to be stuff that's going to be working against the house. I'm calling them the conspiracy tables, is what I'm calling. Yeah,
Ooh,
right.
I hadn't seen that name yet. That's a good. That's good.
Yep, I was excited for that. So you got the tension tables for the players, the conspiracy tables for the houses. Um, and so like I'm really excited about it. I think that's to me the defining trait of the tension, bound by tension system. So while I take away that one part but I also think that the part that I'm not doing by setting the difficulty levels, that also might be just inherent for horror because I think it's great in Party
It,
First.
it's a piece that was very specifically inspired by that genre.
Hmm. Yeah, and so that's yeah, I think it's very much still the tension system because the tables are going to be a lot of fun. We're still working between tension and the players. The one thing that I tweaked in there, which is having a snowball effect through all of this, is that in Party First, during your default roll, if you roll a 1, you create tension that the GM can buy, right? In Unity, the change I've made is that if you roll a 6, so in Party First, if you fail, you roll a 1, you create tension. It is a downward spiral, right? And it can get out of hand. I haven't had an adventure go so badly though yet, so I think that speaks to a little bit of the good balance to the game. But for Unity, it's going to be if you roll a 6. So you're doing well. You're probably passing whatever you're doing, but you're generating tension that the GM will then get to use or the navigator will get to use, right? And this is all going to tie into thematically, which we don't have a name for it yet, but the mystical force that kind of balances everything out in this world, this cosmos, whether it's called Unity, whether it's called the Spiral, whether it's called the Lace, or whatever we come up with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as far as that goes, I think between the two of us, we basically kind of settled on 3 slightly different aspects that we thought were really important. And I think our end goal, at least, is to maintain 2 of them. I used the 2 out of 3 example just off the top of my head earlier before realizing I think that just is the case of where we ended up. So I think that is still a pretty reasonable place to be. As far as especially the like you said, the environment checks being very horror centric, and the new tension table that you're looking at calling conspiracy, which I think I know we already loosely talked about this, but the more I kind of think about it, I like some potential we've got here. Base tension engine, environment checks, and tension makes tension a very immediate type of interaction or threat, so to speak, if you're trying to pick the lock late in the adventure, that type of thing. And one of the things that I know we had talked loosely about, but I maybe had not thought about yet in this context, or the conspiracy tables. I know we talked about, I really like, because we're looking at 3 different kind of categories of stuff in there, and players can kind of push things off, right? That generate tension, and they're like, I don't know, throw it on that category, whatever. We'll just get it out of the way, that sort of thing, and it kind of creates this broader tension, like hanging over their heads, this conspiracy that's eventually going to break loose. That's for future them to deal with, right? And I think that feels fairly accurate for kind of the Three Musketeers sort of thing, right? Like as they go, they're dealing with these immediate things, X, Y, and Z, and eventually, Cardinal Richelieu's plot and everything is revealed on down the line. And I really like that. And just the more I'm thinking about that, the more I don't have specific ideas on this yet. I'm just thinking about, I like that, and if that maybe fills a similar role to make tension central in what's going on, I might just kind of reread what we've got going for it right now, kind of turn that over in my mind and think about, are there ways, or should there be ways to tie that in even tighter, or if it's kind of good where it is, or whatever. But maybe that's just kind of it, is that not that pardon me, gosh, not that tension gets eliminated, it's just kind of the check against it, the threat of it is moved from immediate to impending.
Mm-hmm. And I like what you said there too about trying to make it more interwoven, because I think you're right. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure how to do it yet. Like they hit the exploding tension table, and do you just give them a choice right then? Like, do you want to now, or stuff that happens later? And the stuff that happens later, like half of it is these conspiracy tables moving forward, and they don't know. Maybe they do know, maybe they don't know what the ending is. We'll have to talk about, like, maybe they do know. Maybe we've just got these clocks up there for these conspiracy tables, and it's like, oh, this one's at almost there. Um, and also then tie it to their personal stuff that's happening at the house too. Um, I'm I just thought of this thing again, throwing the spaghetti at the wall, is that every house that you create has a mystery that's happening in it. And my playtest players don't know this yet, because we haven't even talked about doing playtesting for this yet, for getting dates out there or anything. But I'm going to have a centralized mystery that the house that they're in is haunted, and like some of their gear is going to be missing. So if they do have to roll, like they pull like on that tension table, their gear and the stuff that they're relying on working is not going to be able to work. Like they may not be able to use a space shuttle for something, because they got to figure this out. Or maybe like the house is actually on loan. Like there's loan sharks that are going to repossess it, like in a certain amount of time, or and then like it's just the land. The house itself will still be around, but they just won't be able to be at that territory that they're at. So yeah, these are all fun ideas. I hope they're fun ideas. They're probably way too out there right now mechanically, but if we can get this tied back into the tension table, because that's the thing that makes this system work, and work to an exceptional ability, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. No need to, blow smoke, so to speak, that way. But thank you. Um, yeah. I think going too far down that rabbit hole of throwing spaghetti and kind of examining where it's at now and what might be some ways to tie it in more is probably beyond the scope of this podcast episode. Sure. But even despite my misreading, so to speak, due to editing, I think this still led to good discussion and like good things for us to kind of take a sec to consider, like, hey, what is the, we've made a bunch of changes, what is the heart that we don't want to stray too far from as we make the changes. So I think this was still productive.
100%. And I know that my first write up of this stuff wasn't that great. And I know I've made one or two little tweaks to how I wanted to have back and forth on there. But yeah, I going back and rereading some of the stuff, it's like, and your first comment of like, well, you just want to get rid of the tension system. Like, no, 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 not at all.
Okay. Well, and I didn't, like I said, I didn't even think like maybe it was a conscious thought, but just subconsciously I was like, well, okay, this is gone, this is gone, this is gone. Like, wait a minute.
There's no tension points.
um, yeah, yeah. Like there's no way to generate them, and they're not really used for anything anymore. But some of that's been cleaned up. And as far as initial write up and things, I think some of that might get exacerbated with terminology. I know, and I'm doing it too. I know we keep bouncing back and forth. For a quick example, party points as they're used, the player currency in Party First, adventure points as those same things are called in the SRD,
Yeah,
and tentatively unity points or honor points or the like in this game,
virtue. I
and
got rid of
like,
them.
and we keep bouncing back and forth. And I understand we haven't made final decisions, but that does sometimes make discussion tricky.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, I'm gonna throw this out there. Let's end on this real quick. I want. I figured out what I want to do with honor because I think you're right. So for folks that don't know, I wanted to change the adventure points or party points, whatever the player currency is called. I was going to go with honor. I really like that idea because it's this, Three Musketeers. You spend it and all this stuff. And Will brought up the good point. I was like, well, you know, would you spend honor points to get a better score to like roll a waif for their earnings, for their alms, That doesn't sound very honorable. I'm like, well, I know that sounds even better to me because it makes you feel bad, maybe. But um,
Yeah.
so what I struck, and this is how my brain operates a lot of the time, is that I get stuck on this word or this idea and I can't let it go. And it's just finding the right slot for it. And instead of we've got health, we have willpower. In willpower, I was thinking about changing to composure because I want it to be something with the mystic stuff. What if we changed willpower to honor? So you can be insulted. It's still your internal grit or
Yeah.
integrity that you pull on
Okay.
to do stuff, and it fits
Yeah.
really well with the Three Musketeers theme.
Yes. I tentatively like it. There's a
Tentatively. All
part of
right,
me.
that's fair.
I'm trying to come up with the example. Right. I've got a theoretical in my head, but the practical application I'm having trouble thinking of off the top of my head. But if it is an attribute, right? If it's composure, because that's an easier example for me, or willpower,
Yep.
right? Um, I could see scenarios where you are making a conflict roll, say, of your willpower and a coerce skill to, lie to someone and convince, the poor little grandma to give you her last $10 or whatever. Um, just for an example, if you change that attribute name to honor, does that feel weird? You're rolling honor plus coerce to make this grandma give you her last $10.
See, and this is why we have a naming problem because willpower is your mental health. Remember, it's not a
Oh,
skill,
yes,
it's
yes,
not an
yes, yes.
attribute,
I'm done.
and so
Okay,
health
that's
and
fair.
honor, those are
Yep.
the two things that are
Nope.
your
I did
vitality
goof.
for your character.
I did goof. Yeah, there's just so many names, and when we're
Yes.
working on changing names,
Yep.
okay,
We
yes,
have to
it makes
confuse
way more sense as your mental health. We'll call it for me keeping straight what's what.
it. And
Yeah,
this
no,
is
no, that makes way more sense.
right on. And I
Maybe we should just edit that whole section out where I came up with a hypothetical.
no, I love it because it's definitely a part of the process, right? We do have all these names that we got to figure out and nail down at some point in time, but I don't want to nail anything down 100%, because we'll like, what if we come up with something else on the fly and like, you know what, this is actually works or sounds way better. But we
Yeah,
probably should get some ground rules, ground words. I don't know.
yeah. Look, I do hate to say it. uh, when we're in this like spitballing stage for a lot of things still, but I am starting to think just because of discussions like this that maybe narrowing down some naming decisions, and then sticking to those, even if concepts change, but maybe picking some names and getting that consistency as we're talking might might help us.
Sounds good. It's at the top of the document. We have a list of things that we needed to pick for the name, so we'll try and do that this week. But awesome. Thank you so much for the question. I think this was well worth talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was a good episode. Listeners, thank you for following along. And hey, anybody that has got their own thoughts on kind of the Ship of Theseus in regards to any SRD, it doesn't have to be Tension Engine, anything out there, Wretched and Alone or something, go ahead and shoot us a line, drop by the Discord, whatever it might be. And yeah, I'd like to hear some other thoughts.
Thanks, everyone.